Let's get into some foreign policy issues now with Australia's longest-serving Foreign Minister, former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, joining us live from Adelaide. Good to talk to you again, Alexander. First up, I've got to get your thoughts on Anthony Albanese throwing his lot in with the UK, France and Canada to preemptively recognise Palestine, being called out for rewarding terrorism, and now saying that all of the media and his political opponents have fallen for Hamas propaganda. Tell us your take on this.
Well, Hamas have welcomed the Prime Minister's decision and applauded it and congratulated him for it. And he has been roundly condemned by Israel for what he's done, including undermining the negotiations for a ceasefire, which Hamas just walked away from. So this is a huge change in Australia's historic position in foreign policy. We've gone from supporting a liberal democratic country under siege from a terrorist organisation and opposing that terrorist organisation to supporting the terrorist organisation and opposing the liberal democratic state. This is an extraordinary thing for Australia to have done. I mean, I think in a way it is the worst foreign policy decision Australia has made since the Second World War.
And what of the toing and froing over Hamas's statements? Because there was a statement posted subsequently that pointed out the Hamas co-founder Hassan Youssef is in prison, and so he couldn't have put this statement out directly himself. Here's what the Prime Minister said about that today.
Well, what I say is that they shouldn't repeat Hamas's propaganda because it is Hamas which will engage in propaganda because they are being isolated.
Your thoughts on that response, Alexander?
So he now knows, apparently he's just discovered, that Hamas run a very strong propaganda campaign. I mean, the stories of children starving to death and the photograph of a child who actually had cerebral palsy being shown as though the child was starving with a mother who didn't look to me as though she was starving. This is all Hamas propaganda, and the Prime Minister has fallen hook, line and sinker for Hamas propaganda. His propaganda against Israel, against the Jews. I mean, and it's not as though this has just happened recently. The Labor Party has fallen for this propaganda, you know, for the best part of the last 2 years. Ever since the war started, they have been mouthing sympathy for the complaints coming from the Palestinian Authority and from Hamas. They show very little support for Israel at all. It's just extraordinary.
It is indeed. We'll keep coming back to that issue. But I want to talk to you about the summit Friday in Alaska. That'll be Saturday morning Australian time. The US President Donald Trump head-to-head with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Ukraine is going to be the number one and perhaps the only item on the agenda. Here's what Donald Trump has said about the meeting.
Well, we're going to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, and at the end of that meeting, probably in the first 2 minutes, I'll know exactly whether or not a deal can be made.
How will you know that?
Because that's what I do. I make deals.
He'll know pretty quickly, he reckons, Alexander. Now, Donald Trump, he's really talking up expectations. He's thinking he could at least get a ceasefire immediately out of this summit. How realistic is that?
I don't know. It will depend, I think, on the extent to which the Americans have privately been putting massive pressure on Putin and the Russians. As long as they are saying to the Russians, we will make sure you cannot win this war under any circumstances. So your best bet is a ceasefire and enter into some peace talks on land and land swaps possibly with Zelensky. The other thing that the West, not just the Americans, but the Europeans should be saying to the Russians is, we hold $300 billion worth of your reserves, and we will confiscate that $300 billion if you don't agree to a ceasefire. So I think those two things, telling the Russians they can't win, threatening them with the confiscation of their $300 billion worth of reserves, which are predominantly, not exclusively, in Europe, and of course the threat of additional sanctions, particularly on oil exports. That should work, but let's see.
Now, Vladimir Zelensky's not involved in this at the moment. He'll be meeting with Keir Starmer in London tonight. But Donald Trump says he won't get into a real estate trade with Putin, that if they get a ceasefire, when it comes to any land swaps, that will have to be negotiated between Putin and Zelensky, possibly at a three-headed summit with Trump there as well if they want him. But that leaves a critical question of the other factor is for Ukraine, whether they can get a security guarantee, what the European nations and America would provide as a security guarantee. That shouldn't be a problem, should it?
No, I don't think so. And I think Keir Starmer, perhaps Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, would all be able to help to provide that security guarantee with the backup of the Americans. You know, Keir Starmer has talked about this for quite some months now. So, I mean, the question is, what will the Russian response be to the security guarantee? Some people think that Putin could never live with it. But if Putin knows he can never win the war, and if he knows if he keeps going, he's going to suffer more sanctions and lose his $300 billion worth of reserves, he might just be persuaded to agree to a ceasefire and then get into negotiations with Zelensky, possibly with Trump there or possibly without him, over territory.
Let us hope so. We'll see what unfolds over the weekend. Our time. Thanks for joining us, Alexander. I appreciate it.